Right. Here we go. Welcome to the Macworld Podcast. I'm Roman Loyola. I'm here with Mike Simon at the end of the table. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Do you prefer Michael or Mike, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
What does your wife call you when she's angry?
You know what? She probably calls me Mike, but she never gets angry at me.
Mike's usually on the East Coast, but we have a
This is a
special.
lot earlier than I'm used to, people.
So, and sitting next to me is Leif Johnson.
Hey.
Hello, Leif. As I always call it, the most important man in the room, though, is our producer, Dan Masuoka. Hello, Dan.
That's nonsense, Roman. You are the most important.
No.
Without the Filipino Wolverine, who would save humanity?
So,
It is nice to be able to see Dan, because usually I just have a camera locked on you two. So
and as I always say, the reason why Dan is the most important man in the room is not only because without him, this show doesn't happen, because he's our producer, but also because he
That part is
represents you, the viewer, the audience on the internet. He's tracking our Twitter and our YouTube feeds for your comments and questions. Please let us know what you guys are thinking. Dan checks those and he voices your guy. He's your voice, essentially. He chimes in with your guys' comments and questions. And that's a valuable part of this show.
I'm a man of the people.
So he's the man of the people. That's why he's the most important man in the room. So today's topic, we have one topic, and oddly enough, it's about Google.
we're not going to talk about the round Apple Watch.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about the round Apple Watch or Black Dot.
Yeah,
It's been kind of a slow Apple news week. You can check our website for some of these things. But the big thing that happened was yesterday, Google had its developers conference called Google I/O. And the reason we want to talk about Google I/O is because, it's a good idea to keep track of the competition.
Mm-hmm.
It also can maybe be somewhat of a preview of what could happen on iOS and on the Mac, or not
in
less
4 or
less on
5
the
years,
Mac.
maybe.
Yeah. But Google's doing things that are interesting, and we thought we could take maybe an Apple angle at it. So if anybody in our studio anybody in our audience has been following the Google I/O developments and has any thoughts and ideas, let us know. Dan will keep an eye on those and let us know what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, and like you were also saying, that Google products and Google apps end up on the iPhone
Right.
and iOS as well. So it's not like it's a completely versus. It's like you get to enjoy some of these products.
And I'm
Right.
always about that. I think Google's strength really is these kind of universal services and stuff. And
Yeah.
I've kind of rolled my eyes at their, attempt to like almost mimic Apple with, the integration of hardware and software. Because I do believe those services are the real strength.
Yeah. I mean, a great example is Google Maps. A lot of people don't use Apple Maps.
Right.
I would almost say a majority of.
I would say more than half, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
of iPhone
it's the
users.
default, so there's a bunch of people who just open up whatever app is on their phone and use it. But
Yeah.
if you visit the App Store and you regularly download apps, you have Google Maps on your phone and you
Yeah.
use it regularly.
Yeah. So I don't use Google Maps only because I feel like I'm
Stay
supposed to
within
be
the
immersed
ecosystem.
because of my job.
Yeah, I
because of my
go back
position.
and forth too to make
Yeah.
sure, to see how it's
Right.
developing, how Apple Maps
Yeah.
is challenging Google, but it's not even close.
Yeah. But that's just an example of how influential Google and its products
And Assistant is on
yeah.
the phone, all that stuff. Like all of
Right.
Google's stuff. There's very little that's exclusive to
Right.
the Pixel or Android.
Now, it sometimes takes forever for it to come to iOS,
And
which
sometimes it comes to iOS
intentional.
first. Remember Gboard, the keyboard that was
That's
on
true.
iOS before Android. It's
Oh,
like
that's
so sometimes they develop for iOS. So they have 2 feet firmly in both platforms.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that today. That's going to be pretty much because they announced a lot of stuff.
Yeah, a lot.
And so we're going to cover that in today's show. So comments and questions, please let us know what you guys are thinking. So Mike, so I'll toss it off to you because Mike, people might know this already, that Mike kind of splits his time between Macworld and PC World. So he covers both Android and iOS, and as you know, when he often tweets stuff, in the comments he gets back, it's clear that he doesn't have a bias because
People take I do
he's
though.
biased towards both. Apparently,
Whatever I write about, I have a bias for.
So, people hate him on both
Yeah, I
sides,
get
which
lots of
means
equal
he's
hate.
equal. Which means he's doing a good job.
Yeah, I can
of-
honestly say that I like both pretty equally. Like I
Yeah.
see the strengths of iOS and I see the strengths of Android.
Yeah.
So no one's ever called you a Windows Phone
Never.
shill.
Never happened. Although I do get a lot of comments about WebOS, oddly enough.
Oh wow.
And just real quick, Blue Gray and Coral are both Apple Maps people on
Okay.
Twitter,
Oh, really?
and Talman on YouTube is a Waze guy like me.
Yeah, I use Waze a
Waze,
lot as
yeah.
well. That's also a Google thing. They're they bought them
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, and they're
Yeah.
integrating some of that traffic stuff. But
So you're a
Yeah.
Waze shill.
yeah, I use Waze a lot because they, I don't know if I actually get to the place faster, but I'm always moving. So I'm of
Right.
the mind that if I'm not stuck in traffic, I'm doing all right.
Generally, when I use Apple Maps, it's when when I'm walking around streets here and I have my AirPods on and I just want to ask Siri, how do I get to this? And so I will actually use it for that. I did actually just for test when I moved here used Apple Maps to get all the way here from Texas to San Francisco. There was only one really weird mess up that was around Bakersfield, California, but the fact that it got me here okay, that's a sign of improvement.
Well, I was driving with a colleague the other night to my hotel in Mountain View, and we wanted to go to, or she wanted to take me to Clark's Burgers in Mountain View, which is a real famous
Yes.
old school.
Yes.
So she said to Siri on her CarPlay, navigate to Clark's Burgers. She didn't say where. No joke. The directions were to Germany.
Oh my God.
Germany.
Actually, that happened to me. It happened to me yesterday.
We would have gotten there in like 3 days.
Yeah. It happened to me yesterday. I was in Golden Gate Park waiting for my kids to finish soccer practice, and I was driving around, and I wanted to check out this particular spot in San Francisco, and I asked Siri to go there, and I said, I can't remember the name of the spot now. It was something park. It was a little park next to Golden Gate Park, one of these neighborhood parks, and I wanted to check it out, and I said to Siri, where is da-da-da park? I can't remember the name of it, in San Francisco. And it gave me directions to a similar named park in Illinois.
Right. Yeah, so that's where Apple Maps is just like way off the
So-
reservation.
I was kind of like, oh, geez.
I mean, it's a map. It knows where I am. At least it should know what state I'm in.
well, that was the thing. I was like, I said San Francisco,
Right.
but you're taking me to Illinois.
Yeah.
I don't get that.
Was that on your
So-
phone, or did it like? Do you remember?
It was on my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't
because I
have
know
CarPlay.
like CarPlay is different than the phone is
Yeah.
different than the Mac.
Yeah.
And different,
So,
And part of that is because Apple doesn't have all that information about search, right?
Right.
So,
right.
like, I mean, this is just like a little sidetrack. Could you ever imagine Apple creating a search engine?
I think it should stay out of that.
Yeah.
It's way beyond behind in that regard. No, absolutely
Even
not.
if they did, like let's say they overnight was able to create a search in that rivaled like DuckDuckGo or something, it would be, locked down. Like they would that's their thing, and that's what
Right.
some people say. A lot of people say that that's really what's holding them back when it comes to AI and when it
Yeah.
comes to development of
'Cause they
these
don't
things
have the data.
because they don't have it. They use differential data, which is kind of like they add noise to it, so they don't know where it's coming from, and they can't really break it apart like Google can, and we see the results. So,
So,
That was just a little sidetrack.
yeah.
just a little sidetrack. But the one thing I wanted to ask Mike is if there was, what was one thing we'll start off with, there were a lot of things that Google announced,
Yeah.
but what was one thing that stood out that Apple should take note of?
I mean, the obvious one is Assistant
Yeah.
AI. I mean, they showed several things, but the most mind blowing one was this thing they call Google Duplex, which isn't really a product yet. It's more of just
Right.
like a prototype, and they're developing this. But so Assistant was told, like, I want to book a hair cutting appointment for Wednesday. Now, with that information, a little bit, just a normal bit of information, it called a salon, interacted with a customer service representative, a live customer service representative, negotiated schedules and times based on what was available, and booked a haircut for 10 a.m. on Wednesday, then told the person who had initiated the response that your haircut appointment is set for 10 a.m. This wasn't a chatbot. This was real voice communicating with a real person, responding to real things. And then they did it with a restaurant where they called they didn't say what restaurant it was. I'm assuming it was like a Chinese food place because the woman on the other end had a pretty heavily accented
Oh, really?
Chinese voice.
I
Oh,
was waiting for
really?
that, yeah.
Nah, I think it was Chinese restaurant.
And so, but with that, there was a little bit of broken English. There was a little bit of miscommunication, and it was able to kind of
Right.
decipher all of that and even understand that they weren't able to make reservations because they had a party of less than 6.
Right.
So it took all that information and, it added like ums and
Yes.
likes and pauses, and it sounded like a real person. And listen,
Scary.
I'm not going to let's leave the scariness aside for a second and just like marvel at the fact that Google is like light years ahead of everybody when it comes to AI assistants and voices and all this stuff. It's just, like I said, taking a step back from humanity for a moment. It's
Right,
just,
right.
it's like, wow. Like how far ahead are they from Apple? 7 years ago when Siri launched, we could say, do I need an umbrella today? And we were blown away by that. Now Siri basically does the same thing. And Google is able to, interact with real people using their AI assistant language. It's just mind blowing.
Skynet.
Yeah, I know. There's all of that. I'm with you. There's a lot of implications here that are scary. But when you break it down to the people it could help, so all right, so we're just, we're able-bodied people.
Yes, exactly.
If you have problems speaking, there are people who have phobias of using the phone. There are people who have problems talking, have problems understanding or hearing. I mean, the implications for accessibility are just staggering.
Definitely.
Staggering.
Yeah.
So,
I have a question about that.
yes, sir.
How scripted do you think that conversation was?
That's a
was
good question. But the way,
Right.
if
don't-
it was, that was pretty disingenuous by Sundar because he said, this is a real conversation that I'm playing you. If it was, someone programmed this and it wasn't a real
Yeah.
person on the other end, that's like those little things you get on the bottom of the commercial that says, do not attempt when you're, driving around in circles on a track or something. Like he presented it as a real conversation that took place between Google Assistant and a person without any cues beforehand of how the conversation would go.
But
My
you-
guess is the
yeah.
people actually knew that the call was coming, but we were hearing a real call. So this way they didn't call some random place that didn't pick up, number one.
Yeah.
Or, you picked up some guy that was really rude, didn't speak English or something. All kind of variables. I think the people on the other end probably knew the call was coming, but I think it was a real call.
Possibly. Yeah, that's possible. But what I'm saying is I don't think that they said, all right, you say this and then he'll say that. I don't think
No,
that happened.
That's what I meant by real.
Well, I guess, Blue Gray asked, was it live?
It wasn't live.
And then the other question is,
Or at least it wasn't live when they played it.
yeah, do you think that they practiced it?
Possibly. I would say probably. I mean, do I think they made 2 calls and then played them for us? No. They probably made thousands and took
Yeah.
the 2 best ones. But the point is that this is a development. They're working on this technology and it's viable. This isn't just a concept prototype that we're never going to see because it's ridiculous. Like it's actually working.
I would say, Siri has a lot of things, but it's, someone could say, you wouldn't have the ums and you wouldn't have to be able to make the specific, but there are certain cases where Siri looks really impressive if you
sure.
ask it the right
Absolutely.
questions and stuff. So,
Absolutely. And, the voice technology is there and the understanding is there. And, Apple isn't lost in this category, but they're not thinking in the same terms that Google is.
I've brought this up before on previous podcasts, but when even if Apple doesn't get over the privacy and stuff, I would like Siri to be able to understand me better, and and I think that might have something to do with what Roman experienced and everything is because she seems to have a problem with comprehension, whereas I remember shortly before I moved here, I used the dictation in Google Docs on my PC for the first time, and I was just kind of rolling my eyes. And it was amazing.
really
it was
good.
like everything I was saying perfectly. Siri just can't do that.
Right.
And, I think that's an important starting point. And I'm hoping we see something like that at WWDC, that, the recognition is really improved now, guys.
Yep.
So,
And Google also shut off. I mean, it's weird and silly, but they got John Legend to
Right.
record a voice for Google Assistant. Like you can have whenever it launches, you can have John Legend be your Google Assistant. But what they were able to do is, so they asked, he said a bunch of things and they were kind of able to extrapolate the cadence and the inflection of his voice and apply it to everything else.
Yes.
And it's just like, man, like, Apple might be able to do this stuff, but we certainly haven't seen it.
So on YouTube, we have a few comments. Talman says, I truly am puzzled that Apple allows the world to see Siri continue to be dead last as an assistant.
We totally agree.
Doesn't Tim Cook have no shame? And Ashworth responds, I gave it up as useless long ago.
Yeah, me too.
And Sean says, step it up, Apple.
Yeah.
Yes.
The only time I ever really use Siri is when I'm writing an article and I need to. Like I never use it, but I use Google Assistant all the time and Alexa as well in my home.
Yeah, I only use Siri in my car, and that's to
Yeah,
go to a park in Illinois. It's basically what I use it.
My main use for it is when I go to sleep, I say, "Hey, set me, wake me up at 6:30," and so wake me up at 10 o'clock. That's my main use of Siri, and it works good for that.
There was an interesting tweet in response to this demonstration by Benedict Evans, who's an analyst. And his tweet basically said, any task that can be solved by getting a machine language powered bot to talk to a human on the phone should probably be turned into a website, and probably was a decade ago. Why are you asking your phone to call a restaurant and not using OpenTable?
All right.
Which I understand his point. It's like, do you know what? Do you understand?
I understand his point as well, but I mean that's like missing the trees for the forest. I mean, we're talking about this is a very specific demonstration that they gave. I mean, if that's all it does, I agree with them. But we're not talking about it's going to be a restaurant caller. We're talking about this is a personal assistant that can, again, if like we're able to make calls, there are a lot of people who can't. And, so Google can apply this technology to really help people do things that they can't normally do as easily as we can.
When do we get to start trying out this assistant?
That's going to be, I mean, they didn't even say that.
Okay.
So I'm guessing.
This was more of a technology demonstration.
It's
to show
there, but I think we're
what they're
talking about a
working
couple
on.
of years, maybe more.
Yeah.
And everyone calls it the Turing test, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll dial Mike and pretend it's a real person, see if it fools them.
I mean, I've gotten robocalls where someone will be like, "Hi, this is blah blah blah." Oh, let me just fix my headset, and then there'll be like a pause, and then a real person will kick on. So they do have,
But that's just a
some of that,
recording,
right? You can't
right?
interact
So,
with
yeah.
it, but there is, they do use those computerized voices, and they sound real, and they fool me all the friggin' time.
Yeah, it's just one of the things that's kind of an issue with Apple is that they rarely do technology previews of what they're working on.
Yes, this is true. Certainly not years in advance.
Right. They rarely say, this is what we're working on back in the farm, and then they show someone demonstrating something. They never do that. Everything's under wraps. It's because it's always been Apple's way. And it kind of, so for all we know, there's a version of Siri in Cupertino
That's perfect.
that's perfect. And it's actually like an Android robot walking around the spaceship campus.
We also,
you know what I mean?
we also tend to give Apple the benefit of the doubt a little bit too much.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Because there's always something in some lab that, they just haven't shown us yet.
Right.
And I don't know how true that is.
and then on the other hand, it could be that they're so far behind.
Yes.
But we just don't know.
I mean, isn't HomePod a perfect example of how they don't think out? I mean, we're talking HomePod is a 3-year-old device at best.
Right. Right. That's yeah. So HomePod is an example of, well, sure, we don't see the previews that other tech companies do, but if it was that good, they would have already executed it.
Absolutely.
It would have already be on a product like HomePod.
And it's also it's a kind of an indication of Apple's very limited thinking. Like we sell hardware, we sell nice hardware, we sell valuable hardware.
It's their mission statement.
All of the things that kind of, add value to that, it's not necessarily a priority.
Could you imagine them ever giving it up and just trying to go with, partnering with, Amazon or something?
No, never. They like their end-to-end control, for better or worse.
And when they have the right technology, it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But the problem is they're falling so behind because I think, in execution and hardware and stuff, Apple products are amazing. But it's things like this. So
That's why they sell 50 million of them in a quarter.
Exactly.
And people want them.
When we say the stuff like this, and, those of you saying that Siri is useless and stuff, I'm sure you agree. It's not like, oh, Apple sucks. It's like, you're so so close.
Yeah.
You got all that money. You got all those resources. I mean, blow all these other people away.
I mean, it's almost like we need to have a dip in iPhone sales for them to really ramp this stuff up. Like if they dropped by 20%
Right.
next quarter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Apple sold more iPhones since we started this podcast than Google has sold Pixels in its entire lifespan. So it's not something that they need to focus on. Whereas Google, if they lose that edge when it comes to this stuff, that's where the money comes from.
Right. The business model is an important distinction. You know, Google makes its money from data collecting. Apple makes its money from selling devices
And
or
you know,
products.
data collection
Right.
and ads more so than
Right.
you know. Like Google is not actively selling our data. Let's make that distinction. They're not taking what
Right,
Roman
right. It's
put
the
into-
basis of
right.
their
It's-
products
it's-
that they-
yes,
yeah.
they use everyone's data to make their ads and their
Right.
products
It's
more
Facebook
targeted.
that's selling your data. That's right. I got that mixed up. So.
So I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
First, like I have Google Assistant and Alexa on devices at home, but I never installed them to my phone. How's the experience on the phone for you guys?
As well, I'm on an Android phone. It's the best.
Yeah,
it's
on an
better
iPhone,
than it's
though.
better than a Google Home. I'll admit that I've used it a couple of times on the iPhone, and the problem is it doesn't integrate with the back end of the phone like it does on an Android phone.
So you can't have it like if it pulls up maps. If you say give me directions somewhere, will it open up Google Maps?
On my phone, it did, and I don't know if you don't have it installed, will it go to Apple Maps? Probably. But it's a lot harder for it to work with your phone. For like on an Android phone, you can set defaults for all these things, and on an iPhone, you know, it uses Mail, Safari, Maps are the default apps. So and Apple very limited with what it gives third-party apps access to. So it's different. But as far as like asking questions and things like that stuff works great in smart home control and things like that.
Right.
And because we have a few comments on Twitter about imagining HomePod with Google Assistant, I mean, if they make Google Assistant for iOS, do you think that they would ever make allow Google Assistant on HomePod?
Never.
Never.
Yeah, absolutely never. It's just not going to happen. That's the distinction. Apple is all Apple. Google is, we don't care what we work with. We just want people to use our products.
But it's on iOS, so it's not like they're preventing.
Well, the thing is with the HomePod in particular, I think it would be really smart for them. I think we will eventually see integration with Spotify, and
I don't even know about that, man. I'm not so sure.
I think it would be the smart
not
thing
at
to
the
do.
level of Apple.
But you'll
Music.
never see Siri, is my point. I mean,
You'll
excuse me,
never,
you'll never see
see
Google
Google.
Assistant.
No, never Google Assistant. But I don't even know how integrated we're going to get with Spotify.
Yeah.
Like, will you be able to say play so and so song without saying play so and so song on Spotify?
There has to be, with the very useless home app, a way to like set it to the default or something. Because I really believe that, they really need to open that up to, look, because it's a wonderful speaker. It's amazing.
Yeah,
I was really surprised by
sounds
that.
good.
But as far as, useful. Okay, give you an idea. I was going to take the HomePod to my roommate, for like a day just to let him try because he's a big Apple fan too. And I kept thinking, well, one of us, he has to have an Apple Music subscription. He doesn't have that. And there were all these buts. And I eventually said, I'll just leave it on my desk. So that gives you an idea. It's too frustrating, even for a person who's an Apple fan. I know he doesn't have Apple Music, but he has a Mac, iMac, he has a MacBook Pro, he has AirPods. Yeah, I mean, it gives you an idea. So just this one thing.
It does one thing really well.
Yes.
And that's it. And another thing Google showed off yesterday was like speakers with screens in them. Like the Amazon Echo Show, whatever the Echo Show.
It's the show.
Yeah, so it had and they're tailoring Google Assistant now to retrieve things like recipes and movies and videos from YouTube and things like this. I mean, Apple is that's not even. There's nothing. Like it's not even like they're behind. They haven't even started that race yet.
Right.
As far as like a visual Siri, there's nothing except for the readout you get of the what it's saying on your phone. That's it.
Yeah.
And we have a comment on Twitter or question: whose auto component is superior? And that's kind of related to Siri in some way.
They were very close. As far as understanding goes, I mean, Google still has the lead there with Assistant, but Google just kind of recrafted its interface at I/O. That wasn't really part of the keynote because it's a small component.
Yeah.
And they also are now going to have just apps that you can download on the Play Store and install them. And that is a big difference between Apple. You have to kind of wait for a developer to work with Apple and then it just pops up. Now developers are going to be able to make third-party apps for Android Auto that you can just download and install and pop up right on your screen. So in that instance, plus it works on the phone. You don't need a head unit or navigational, whatever it's called. You don't need something built into your dashboard. You can just bring your phone. And if the phone kind of changes to an Android Auto interface, so it's not as busy, you can do directions, you can do music, you can do messages, you can do things like that. You can summon assistant, all that stuff without having a fancy new car navigation screen. So Android Auto, I think, is superior in that regard.
Yeah, I only have experience with CarPlay, and compared to what Toyota has as their system,
that's for sure.
Man,
They're both better than any car one that I've used.
So, but Google introduced more stuff, and Leif, you paid attention to the keynote yesterday.
I paid attention to.
I even wrote an article. Man.
Was there something that you noticed of note that Google showed off that you think Apple should be paying attention to?
So yesterday I went to the dark side for a bit and I wrote an article for PC World.
It's not that dark, people.
But it was, things that we're looking forward to from Google Lens. And so here's the thing. Apple had a pretty substantial lead in AR. Just like Siri with voice control, they kind of made the idea cool. And there was HoloLens and stuff like that. But Apple started getting people excited about using it on their phones and stuff. So what we saw for yesterday, so Apple has given, developers with ARKit something nice to work with and everything. And there's some amazing stuff you can do with it. But the problem is it seems to really be leaving it in the developer's hands to do something with it. You're not seeing currently much integration with AR in the phone itself from Apple's own products.
There's
none. Exactly. Sure. And, you've seen these apps where it shows how accurate Apple's ARKit is with like measuring tapes and that it shows it specifically. But there's nothing that you can actually do with Apple stuff itself. Google yesterday showed us, so when you open up Google Maps, it has AR interaction. You look around on your phone and so here's, like I'm looking out here on 2nd Street and it'll like, whoa, there's LinkedIn. Yeah. There's, the American Grilled Cheese Sandwich Shop. And it would show you that riff views and everything while you're looking through your phone. And the really thing that it was saying, sometimes when you open Google Maps or even Apple Maps, you're looking down and you can't figure out which direction you're facing. Looking through the camera will actually literally show you the outline of the streets and stuff. So there's no question. This is a real integration of AR into your phone. I'm always saying that AR will be tremendously useful for your phone. The way I always said it in the podcast is like, you need to figure out where to put your oil in your car or something like that. And here you have an overlay of your underside of your car and it shows you, it points these things out. Google is actually actively doing this. It is showing you that this is possible with its own software and hardware through, but it's not, I was going to say through the Pixel phone, but the amazing thing is they said that this is going to be integrated with a lot of other phones that can handle it.
Including that one.
Exactly. You don't have Samsung and Huawei, because I believe they already have that kind of AI stuff built in, but so many other phones.
Well,
LG.
in Maps, it'll be available in Maps. You're talking about the camera. So there's two different things.
This is what I get is that so it's not even just a Pixel phone, even though they're Android phones. There's often been, kind of like a little wall there, but it's even going to be able to, this big integration with this, that's what I'm most impressed by yesterday, is that Google really showed us what it could do with AR. Apple has been talking a big game about it, so I'm hoping, WWDC is just, a little under a month away. So I'm hoping that they really show us that, you can really do some amazing AR stuff through your phone like we haven't been able to see before. And I think that's what it just blew me away. Like, okay, the other thing, and Mike here actually had a chance to try it out. You look at a scanned text of, you look like at a printed book or something like that. You can actually, with your fingers, select the text as you're looking at it.
Yeah, so what he's talking about is called Google Lens, and this was premiered last year's show. So, and at the time, it was built into Photos, which was weird. Mm-hmm. So you had to snap a photo of something, go into the Photos app, pull it up, click on the lens button, and then it would give you some information about it. If it was a flower, it would tell you what it was. If it was a building, it would try to get some information. So now it's live. It's built into the camera, and you can click on Google Lens within your camera and point it at, I don't know, say like a shirt, say like a shirt I'm wearing, and it'll analyze the shirt and bring up a bunch of different results of not just that shirt, but shirts that kind of look like it. So maybe it would give something with Snoopy on it, or something with the cartoon character, and
and links where you can buy it.
Links where you could buy it, of course. It was like as Leif was saying with text. So it took a picture of a page of a book, and the guy was able to just like straight up copy the text from the picture and drop it into a document. I mean, that is, as a writer, that's like whoa. I mean, that is so helpful. It showed things like you pointed at a movie poster and it'll bring up a video of a trailer from the movie or a concert photo, and it'll bring up a video. Like these are problems that we never really noticed that we had, and Google is solving them before they become, issues. This is what Apple used to do.
This is what I mean. It's really thinking about AR and about how to, actively use it as opposed to games or something like that.
Right. Practical uses for augmented reality, which, we've seen in bits and pieces over the years. Like, there was apps that you can scan around and see buildings and things. But this, for one, it worked really well. But for two, it's taking it from a broad spectrum and applying it to very individual cases. And it's just, it's really cool to be able to look at a screen and to put stuff on the wall, or to open an IKEA app and see what furniture looks like in your house. That's neat. This is stuff that you can use on a regular basis without opening an app, without even really realizing that you're using AR. And it's what, it can bring it to the masses without having to go and download an app and know what you're doing and even know that it exists. So, yeah, it's just awesome.
Yeah, because Apple, I mean, it's funny when Tim Cook talks about the future of iOS, his main talking point is often AR.
Constantly.
It's constantly AR.
He's always talking about AR.
But no one ever points out that the AR execution's always in a third-party app.
Always, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that he believes what it can do, and I'm sure he was watching that keynote yesterday saying, damn, what we should be doing.
Right. So, maybe they, like as I kind of said before, maybe they are doing it, and we just don't know yet because that's the way Apple works. And maybe at WWDC, we'll see something this June, or maybe not. So, because again, this is Apple's MO. They don't do technology previews. The one thing that's a little discouraging is that Apple has been unofficially said, or there were leaks that Apple's approach to WWDC this year is going to be more of maintenance and upkeep and less about major new features, which probably might shift because of recent developments by competitors. So they might have to figure out something to pull out for their dog and pony show.
I mean, I don't think they're going to have a 2-hour keynote that doesn't.
No, that doesn't show
anything. Some excitement, right? We've heard rumors before that Apple shows are going to be boring, and they turned out to be nothing. To be like big releases.
Good,
so it could just be that they're keeping things quiet.
So, for all the leaks, there are some stuff that do manage to stay really quiet.
When Apple wants to keep something secret, they do. When they really care about not like. I think about the Apple Watch. We didn't know anything about that before that landed. We didn't see the design. We didn't see a leak of the OS. We didn't know what features. We knew it would do fitness stuff, but we hadn't. Apple really locked that thing down. So
the nice thing about the Apple Watch too is I think nobody was really expecting it. And when people look for leaks and the product,
we knew it was coming. We just didn't know what
it
was going to be. Like people knew. At or around the late 2015, they were going to release something. We didn't know it was coming necessarily at the iPhone event, but there were a lot of speculation that it was coming in early 2016, late 2015. But we had, we didn't know the shape. We didn't know anything. We didn't know the crown. There was a lot of things about it that we just didn't know. So I would not be surprised if Apple, brings out some really cool stuff at WWDC. I just don't know if it's going to be at the level of what we saw yesterday.
Right.
And it's easier to keep software quiet than hardware.
It is. Yeah. Well, that was we didn't know. I mean, Google does that all the time. We don't know anything about what they're releasing.
Before we move on, and I brought up WWDC for a reason, and that was because it's was our poll question. The poll question asked, what new or improved iOS features do you want to see besides Siri?
Because we know we said that. We know you
Right.
were going to say
At
that.
WWDC. Yeah, because when we asked a question, one of the answers was originally Siri, and then we are like, but that's what everyone's going to answer. So that's why we added the besides Siri. So the results were 51% of people who voted, is over 900 votes. 51% wanted to see improvements in Apple Maps. 24% with AR, which probably could tie into Apple Maps.
That's what's up.
15% wanted to see features on combating phone addiction, which,
That's funny.
so these answers were sort of tied to Google's announcements if people didn't notice that. So Google announced some features that were supposedly would help fight phone addiction, or at least get people using their phones less, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then 10% said Apple News because Google announced some new Google News features. So, but most people want to see improvements to Apple Maps, which isn't surprising, which probably we should have said in the poll, besides Siri and Apple Maps. So, but anyways, some interesting comments. A lot of people said, despite what we said in the question besides Siri, some Twitter followers like Shark the Tank and a couple others were saying that, you know, AI and Siri should be the priority
Yeah.
over everything.
That's goes with that.
Yeah. So that kind of goes without saying. A few people wanted to see improvements to Apple Music and the Apple Music app.
Sure. I'm down with that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind seeing a free.
Yeah. Mally Error on Twitter said that he would like to see the music app redesigned because it's now just a mistake.
It isn't so good. Yeah,
It is kind of a cluttered mess.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because we always complain that iTunes is a mess because it's just trying to do too many things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that Apple Music is sort of,
Too simple.
It's like simply complex.
right, exactly.
Like they tried to build a simple music app, and it's just like, where is things? Like, where are things? Like
Right.
searching my library versus like they didn't think of a practical way. All right, how are people going to actually use this app to get
Right.
new music
It's
or
the-
old music?
It's the thing of like people, it's the common thing in software where the people who design and write the software are in their own little universe, and maybe they use the app differently than
Maybe,
someone than regular people, or someone who's versed in UI or something like that. So
I mean, it's not a make or break thing, but
Right.
it could definitely use some refinement.
right.
I'm just always amazed that, these are the developers and stuff. They're real people too.
Yeah.
They have to use this stuff and everything. So it's maybe they don't use the competition enough.
Yeah.
It's and then it's not. Now when I say don't use the competition and stuff, it's like, let's see what we can steal. It's like, wow, our version is a lot more complex than this. I mean, when I use Apple Maps, I can't believe it's so hard to like find the album, because I'm listening to something I really want. It's like, whoa, let me find more by this artist.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to do all this kind of backwards stuff to get to it. It's kind of annoying. So
On Twitter, BRTOS said that iMessage is in the cloud, which is
there you go.
one of those things that we always joke about.
and people are still reporting that you see iMessages out of order after all
Yeah.
this time. So
So some interesting results with the poll results on that. So we'll see what happens in WWDC. WWDC is the first week of June this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
June 4th to the 8th.
Yeah, June 4th to the 8th.
Okay.
So the keynote for people is June 4th. So that's what people will want to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens in June.
Yeah, well, Light Child is asking if there will be a new iPad. Any new iPads?
Maybe. I mean,
That's what we can say,
the
maybe.
Pro.
Yeah.
I mean, there won't be an update to the 9.7-inch one that just came out, but yeah, we could get new Pros with Face ID cameras and blah 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 blah.
as I said in
Right.
my review, the new 9.7-inch is a pretty impressive device. I kind of consider it a replacement for my Pro. So they're really going to have to
Yeah.
make the Pro more interesting. So I think we might see a refresh on that. That's maybe more than a refresh. So,
Do you think they're going to update any information about the Mac Pro?
Mm-mm.
No.
Not a
Not yet.
whisper.
No, I don't.
They already
Yeah.
squashed that hope. What
Yeah.
was it, like a month ago when they said it's not coming out till next year.
Yeah, TechCrunch did a report, so I don't
Yeah.
think they won't address it. So as far as the iPad goes, they'll probably demonstrate some new features that the iPad Pro can use, and then they'll show some new hardware, some
Maybe.
new iPad Pros. So
Maybe.
kind of tie that together. So that seems
There was
like
a rumor, Mark Gurman of Business and stuff.
Bloomberg.
I always get that
Bloomberg.
wrong. I always get that wrong. Sorry, man. He said that a lot of the iPad specific Pro features are
Yeah.
going to be pushed till next year. So
yeah.
I mean, who knows? But he's usually pretty plugged in. So,
Yeah. So, but back to Google's developer conference. So, Mike, was there another thing that you saw that Apple should take note of?
yeah, I mean, Android. I mean, it sounds ridiculous because this
Yeah.
is an argument that we're going to have until the end of time or the end of both of these operating systems. But Google's doing some, real important things with Android P that Apple isn't. And maybe that changes with iOS 12, but as it stands right now, we don't have the iOS 12 beta, so we're just going off what Google's doing for its next version. And the big thing they announced was this thing called digital well-being. Is that right? That's right. Digital well-being.
Yeah.
And it's not a feature, it's not an app, it's a an initiative, we'll call it.
Is that the addiction relation?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what they want to do is kind of get us to use our phones less. And this is a thing that Apple should be paying pretty close attention to because they were called out was about 6 months ago by a bunch of pretty big time investors that said, hey, you're not doing enough to keep our kids regulated on their phones, what they're doing, how long they're doing it. And that's true. There's not really any controls. There's restrictions in Safari and things, but there's not a an app or a setting that you can say, okay, I'm going to shut the phone down in an hour, or you can't use it from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. when you're sleeping. Things like that. Apple just doesn't have that. Google did. They had this thing called Family Link, where you can actually control your kid's phone from your own phone, and you can set restrictions. You can shut it down. It's you can regulate what apps, then what videos they watch, and things like this. Now this is built into Android, and it's not just for kids; it's for everybody. So Google is saying, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. They're saying, all right, here's all this cool stuff we're doing, but we don't want you to use it as much as you'd like to. And it's commendable, and it's a bold move. And they're definitely leading the industry because there's nothing that Apple is doing about it. There's, so Google there's something called the Android dashboard, which was going to show in horrific detail how much you're using, what apps you're using the most, how many notifications you got, how much time you spent using your screen when it was on, things like that. And then they're going to implement little tools. You can set limits for yourself on the apps where it'll give you notifications. You've been using Twitter for a half hour. You might want to shut it off. They're going to let you dim the screen to black and white at night so you're not as, stimulated by it. So it's just things like this that they're doing to kind of show you that, these things are wonderful in our lives, but they're also detrimental to your real world experience, to the time you spend with your families and your friends, and just to your health. You're getting less sleep, all things like that.
I can understand like the parental controls, but I wonder how much people will actually self-regulate with these.
Yeah.
It's like I set my alarm clock, but I hit snooze a few times, so obviously the system doesn't really work.
I mean, it's true, but it's also like quitting smoking.
Take some willpower.
It also takes some pressure from your family and friends. So maybe if that's there, my wife will say, "Hey, I'm turning on your app limit for Twitter because I'm sick of you looking at it at the dinner table." It's not just a personal decision. It's taking into your entire life, and someone might not want to quit smoking, but their wife or their kids might want them to, and maybe they'll just look at it a little bit differently. And it's just Google putting, yeah, sure. Is everyone going to do it? No, but it's Google giving us the tools. And the understanding that smartphones aren't something that we need to be using 20 hours a day.
So you made the analogy with smoking. What's the equivalent of the patch?
Well, I was going to say, along the line, it's in my case, it's losing weight, and there are all kind of apps I have my Apple Watch, track my calories, and all this stuff like that. But ultimately, it comes out of awareness that I should be doing this, and so I have to do this, and realizing that looking at my phone isn't so good to me. Well, it kind of is because it's my job, but it's but a lot of that you have to have willpower and stuff to start from that.
Yeah, of
so I
course.
think it's for having the tools for people who want to do that type of self-improvement, already there is a good thing.
So Dan, sort of a somewhat cynical way to look at it is that as Mike said, they're giving us the tools to use, but at the very least, in a cynical way, it's good marketing. Do you know what I mean? Google can always say, we're giving you the tools to control yourself. And Apple can't say that.
Yeah.
It's like how gambling websites and like advertisements always say, "Oh, and if you have a gambling addiction, here's the number."
Right.
And that's true. And cigarettes put it on their packs that it's
Right.
that it's the 70.
Not by choice.
But right, no, I was just going to say that like they're regulated.
They don't want
Exactly.
to.
Google is saying, Google is getting ahead of all that because
Yes.
they see it coming down the pike, or they're just saying, listen, we care about our youth. They're not necessarily going to lose any sales by implementing a switch in Android that lets you use your phone less.
Right.
Apple might.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right,
I've been
exactly.
thinking
That's
that.
the thing. Yeah, there's no risk in this.
Very little. Yeah.
So yeah, there's no risk. So, but there's all because somebody will always say, "I'm going to pick this over that because this lets me do that." It's not, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So like I said, it's good marketing.
Yeah.
So at the very least, and I think it's kind of a cynical way to look at it.
A little
too.
bit. Yeah.
But
And it's like Mike said, they getting ahead of that. So it's especially good marketing, as you put it, because you're, before somebody tries to do like a regulation or something, they're showing that they're doing it themselves, which more people should do. And when there's a stated problem and stuff, but I like that it goes beyond just a scary picture or a warning or something like that. These are actual tools that really affect your experience, as opposed to we got to do this. Here's a you can barely see kind of thing. So. I like that.
I mean, this also sounds like a very easy thing that Apple could
Absolutely
implement.
it is.
So
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's been 11 years though, and they haven't done it. There's not even there's literally no parental controls on iOS. My son uses the iPad. I've tried to get him to use an Android phone. It ain't happening. he likes his iPad, but I
Good kid.
can't. I have to set. I've taught him to do it, but now when he starts playing, he says, "Alexa, set a timer for 30 minutes." And then when that thing goes off, he knows to shut the iPad down. He could do that with Siri as well. But there's no way for me to, if I'm not monitoring him, I can't shut down that iPad. I have to trust him or grab it from him.
So you don't know if in the middle of the night he's sneaking down there, grabbing the, and then putting it back.
Considering he doesn't get out of bed to get to get water, I don't think he's doing that.
Do you think that's related to Apple's emphasis on privacy, that they consider even that?
I don't think. No, I think that we use that as a crutch way too often to say that Apple's not doing this because of privacy. That because that's on your phone. I mean, that's it. That's private. That's,
I know
that's
it's
on
for
your
your
phone.
kids, but you're technically making a device remotely shut down. and stuff
Stop.
like that. Okay.
No
I will
way.
stop.
I think they're just not.
it's just
thinking
not
in
seen
those
as a
terms.
priority.
Yeah.
by Apple.
They will. iOS 12 absolutely will have that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But it's because they were publicly censured. Well, not public censured, and now they have no choice.
From the scary investors.
Yeah, well, that's they're what 950 now, not 950 billion. They're this close to $1 trillion market cap. So those investors matter, Leif.
Oh, I didn't say. I didn't really mean that sarcastically. I didn't. Yes.
Well, was there another thing that Google introduced that you thought Apple should take note of? This?
I mean, as far as features, but I think there's a lot of things we could talk about. But I would say that Google, Apple has always been proud of its kind of like startup type of organization and stuff like this. But the fact that all this stuff seems to be so integrated so beautifully at Google, it makes me wonder
If you get the right phone.
Right. Well, yeah, but going along the same way, because Apple, it's all built in one thing.
Yep.
So even I should actually be having a superior experience for that fact. And I just everything seems to work so beautifully in that Google thing. Whereas, we're so used to the iOS, like this something works, Siri works great for HomePod, but it doesn't, for iPhone, but it doesn't work so great for HomePod and stuff like that. Where that doesn't seem to be as much of a problem with Google. It's a freaking operating system that goes around multiple phones. Shouldn't be a problem with a company that, makes its own devices and everything is meant to be integrated and stuff. And, what I was seeing yesterday made me think that, maybe there needs to be a shift in the the organization. And I've said this on the podcast before, but I think the big strength of Steve Jobs, as jerk that he was that he was the guy that was bold enough to say this is stupid and a person isn't going to be using like this. This is you're making this overcomplicated. It's not usable enough. And yes, he was a jerk about it, but he would tell people and it would get done. And I think the great genius of Steve is he had a really good idea of how people use stuff in the real world. And I'd like to see more of that from Apple itself. And, because at Google, as we've already said in this podcast, has, with its AR, with Google Lens, with everything else, they're getting really good ideas of how people actually use the products in the real world, and they're implementing their own devices. Apple is commendable because it's giving, with ARKit and stuff, ways for developers to do this with their third-party devices. But in order for the iPhone and Mac and everything continue being truly like magical devices, they need to start incorporating this stuff into their own work. And I'm really hoping we see something like that at WWDC.
And one thing that Google took from Apple, although they said they were working on it before the iPhone launched, which is
the fact that they had to point that out.
Yeah. And it was very subtle, but they said we've been working on this for over a year. All right, but so the Android has a new gesture-based navigation system that has very similar to what's the phone? iPhone 10. So you swipe up now, and it's a horizontal screen instead of the vertical one, and the home button is you can use gestures on the home button rather than just being a simple button. So, these companies borrow, copy liberally from each other, and I think we will see a lot of what we saw yesterday in iOS 12 and iOS 13. But what it seems to me is Google has a lead in very important areas right now that Apple, I don't see them catching up for really until Google decides that we're done.
Right.
And on the other hand, I mean, Google's never going to catch up to Apple's hardware, never. I mean, the Pixel phone is fine. It's not an iPhone.
Right.
The Google Home Max is fine. It's not HomePod. It's never going to happen. I saw yesterday this Android TV. It's made by JBL. It's called a Link Bar, and it has Google Assistant built in, and it's a cool way to kind of integrate all that stuff into a speaker. It's not an Apple product. Like there's different leads that they have in things and different priorities, and I just don't know if Apple, if their focus is capable of really saying, okay, the hardware we're gonna slowly iterate a little bit. But the iPhone 10 we're gonna keep for 2 to 3 years while we work on AI, AR, all that other stuff.
Right.
I just think that they care too much about A, hardware, and B, profit to really spend the energy, the research, and the time that it needs to, really kind of not necessarily take the lead, but to become a major player in that conversation. I don't know.
I mean, it kind of goes back to what you guys were talking about earlier, that they're, based on their business models, one being, kind of the data side and one being hardware side, that there really isn't the financial incentive to be that much of a leader in either side, to take on the other side.
Right. And it's a perfect example of that is HomePod. Apple tried to say, okay, we're going to combine this with this, a high-priced, high-profitable piece of hardware with this software integration that you can get for $25 and from Amazon into what? Into a product that no one's buying because it's too expensive and doesn't do enough.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the problem that I see.
And you still have the features that they said were going to come with it out.
I mean, it's not even there yet because it's not a priority. Like all right, so let's say HomePod gets multi-room audio tomorrow. Is it going to sell any more? No. it's just going to give the people that bought it already a little extra.
It's something that should have been there in launch.
Yeah, and listen, Apple's commendable for there's a lot of things that Apple does to add value to old hardware that they've sold already. I'm not saying that Apple is only interested in selling new and new, more and more and more and more, but their focus is on high-priced hardware, and that's just a fact.
Yes.
And Google's isn't. You know, I mean, yes, this phone costs $900. They sell like 3 of them.
Right.
Apple has to sell 50 million iPhones a quarter, or else their stock drops 10%. So I mean, they you know, this needs to be something that they continue to focus on.
Yeah, I wonder if, you know, not knowing anything about product design or product development or anything like that, does, you know, is this an easy task? I mean, it seems to me that Apple's good at making hardware. They're very good at creating aesthetics that people find pleasing, that are attractive, that have implementations that other companies can't execute on. So is the software part that creates the new features, you know, that like Google's very good at, is that easy to do? I have no idea.
I mean, I'm not a developer either, but I would say no. For example, the gestures,
Yeah.
they're very similar. On the iPhone 10, I picked that thing up and I knew, without reading a how-to or without looking at an instruction, I knew what to do. I installed Android P yesterday, and like I'm fumbling around. I don't know where to find things. I'm pressing the back button when I should. Like Apple, you know, when they focus on something to get it right on the software level, they get it right.
Right. They get it really, yes. They get,
But all this periphery stuff, you know, it's just not in their purview
yeah.
right now.
So it's funny because, you know, it's not to say that it's all doom and gloom for Apple. I mean,
No, not in
Warren,
its lightest. Not at all.
yeah, Warren Buffett the other day was saying that if he could invest 100% in Apple, he
Yeah,
would.
absolutely.
So, but I mean, he's looking at a different point of view. He's not a technologist.
Yeah, right.
He's an investor. He's looking at returns and stuff. He probably doesn't even know, you know. I doubt he even uses a smartphone.
Well, I mean, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I mean,
His assistant does.
you know,
so.
this type of stuff, this AR, this AI stuff. I mean, how many people use it on a regular basis?
Right.
It's still a small percentage of the population.
Right.
But when we watch what Google is doing and how they're thinking, when I sat there and I saw, you know, Sundar Pichai talk about how, you know, the direction and how far ahead they are with their thinking and how this can affect the world, you know, you just think to yourself like, well, you know, I use an iPhone, and why isn't Apple on this too?
Yeah, to me, it's a generational thing also. You know, maybe our generation and maybe the generation before us and after us, immediately before and after us, maybe we won't make full implementation of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But my kids will.
Sure.
My kids will. And
Yeah.
if that's a customer that Google can
Yeah, my
reel
son
in
is 6
now,
and he has an Echo in his room to turn the lights on.
right. And, you know, that's a 60-year, 70-year, 80-year customer that you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so yeah, it's, you know, I guess what I'm saying is for the short term, Apple's going to be fine.
Oh,
Yeah.
for the medium term. I
Right.
mean, it's not. This isn't going to affect them, you know, in any
Right.
real way for, yeah, as you say, for a long time.
Right.
But and I think by then they will figure
it
it
to a
all
certain
out.
point,
And,
right.
Yeah.
Right. But you know, as I said, there's a generational thing. You need to keep people coming to your products, and you have to do it more than just creating well-designed hardware.
Right. And I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it reaches a point where Apple just partners with Google. I mean, they did it when the iPhone launched. Maps, YouTube.
Yeah.
That was the, you know, the value of that product. 20% of it was because it had Google stuff in it.
Yeah.
So maybe they reach a point where they're like, you know what, we can invest $20 billion in this, and we're still not going to be where Assistant is. So let's just shake hands. I mean, not that they're really enemies. They're just both big, giant tech companies. I mean,
Right.
they do play nicely with each other. Maybe they just work it in. Maybe Google has, the Apple iPhone the cameras powered by Assistant on Google Lens. Why not?
Yeah.
You know, why do we need to develop competing systems for everything?
So, well, because the government wouldn't let us do that. Because then there would be one. So
I'll say this about Google, that I got stuck with a tofu salad yesterday because they were all out of it.
So
They need to have more food at I/O.
Well, I think that just about does it for this week's episode of the Mac World podcast.
I didn't even get into notifications, but
So-
we'll talk about that next week.
There's a lot of stuff that happened. We'll post articles in the show notes for this particular show. If you want to learn more about what happened at Google I/O, get an idea of what's going on, and see what Apple could be doing, to compete. So
You can tweet me at Morlium and call me biased if you'd like, or tell me how great WebOS is.
yeah. But anyways, I'd like to thank Mike and Leif for
Thank you, sir. Good to
being
be
this
here.
one. So
Good to look at you guys in the flesh.
I'd like to thank Dan, our producer.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank
Dan.
you.
And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. We'll be back next week, Wednesdays at 10 o'clock Pacific. I made an error on the website.
Uh-oh.
I put 10
PM. I
p.m.
saw that.
And
should do a 10
last night
PM
I was
show.
like, oh, and then like curse words came out of my mouth, and I was like, damn it. So, but it's 10 a.m. Pacific.
Hey, man, I'll be here. I'm down to do a 10 p.m. show, too.
Actually, I am too. It's 10 p.m. somewhere.
Mac at night.
So, just not Pacific. So, but yeah, tune in next week. Hope you can join us next week for our show, and we'll see you then.
See you then.
Thank you very much.
All right.